Hi, I'm here this morning to talk about As You Like It, our first work of the semester, our first play, As You Like It. I hope that you have the book. Well, you may not have the print book, but this is the book that we're using for the semester, right? Obviously, there are other sources available. There's many places where you can get As You Like It, but you don't get all the editorial material. And in this case, I'm especially fond of the editorial material because it's written by Dr. Gene Howard, who is now at Columbia. But Dr. Howard was my graduate advisor when I was a grad student at Syracuse many years ago. And I took a few classes with Dr. Howard as well. In fact, I made the mistake of telling my wife that Dr. Howard was the most intelligent woman I ever met in my life. My wife thinks that at best she could only be the second most intelligent woman. I don't know what she's talking about. So, if you have the book, please make sure that you read Dr. Howard's prefatory material. It's very thorough, very interesting and surprising too. Amazingly, she and I seem to think alike. Many of the questions, for instance, that I've put forward for the writing assignment, she does talk about, at least to a certain extent, in the preface. For example, the whole issue of gender and the gender bending qualities of As You Like It. And I'm sure most everybody in the class knows already. If you don't, I'm a little surprised. But that during Shakespeare's time, the female roles were played by males, typically younger men, i.e., boys. And so and everybody knew it, of course. Everybody at the time knew that there were boys playing the women. So, for instance, when Rosalind, who's being played by a boy, pretends to be a boy, so you have a boy playing a girl, pretending to be a boy, and then on top of that, Ganymede playing Rosalind. So it's like four flips, right? And this opens up the door to a lot of different issues. If you're going to tackle, for instance, the gender question for the essay assignment, that's something to really examine, to really look at. And Dr. Howard points out that Ganymede was a name of a boy in Greek mythology, which I will let you do the reading about. But that's a lot going on in As You Like It, and not just with Rosalind, of course. The kind of issues of who's attracted to whom and why do get a little interesting and a little complicated. Right? This is brought out also by a passage from the preface, not written by Dr. Howard, by Brett Gamboa. It's the final part of that. If you haven't read it, I understand because it's after the bibliography. But there is a brief passage about how it could be performed. And Mr. Gamboa basically talks about how different characters can be played in different ways, right? Emphasizing different kinds of approaches or attitudes towards the character, which, while you're keeping the lines the same and the action is the same, could make for a slightly different interpretation or a different feel of the play as a whole. Right? One of the things that happens in Shakespeare a fair amount, actually, is a lot of parallels. Right? We'll be talking about parallels all semester. For instance, in Hamlet, you have the whole Hamlet story, but in the background is Fortinbras the whole time. Or in Lear, you also have the Gloucester story, right? Those are the two pieces that we'll be looking at the end of the semester. So there's oftentimes pairs or parallel storylines going on. And you have, for instance, a conflict of brothers. Okay, you have the two dukes, the younger duke who usurps the older duke. On the other hand, you have the two brothers. In this case, the older brother who's in charge is not treating his younger brother properly, not raising him to be the gentleman that he is in spite of being the younger brother. It's interesting to think about this in light of primogeniture, the concept that the oldest son inherits everything, right? Whether it's, a title and land or what have you, right? And that any other son has to make his own way in the world, right? Which, of course, as Dr. Howard points out, put an enormous amount of strain on those younger sons. So when Orlando is not being raised to be a gentleman, he basically is being raised to be a peasant, in his own words. That's a real insult on a lot of ways, but there's also a practical problem. How's he going to make his way? He doesn't want, obviously, to be a peasant. He shouldn't have to be a peasant. And yet his brother treats him as such. There's also an interesting character, Jacques, or Jacques, I think would be the better pronunciation, who kind of isn't deeply connected. He's not one of the lovers or anything like that. But he is a malcontent of sorts, a misanthrope, if you will. Of course, he gets probably the most famous lines in the entire play. I wonder about Jacques. Is he like a stand-in for Shakespeare himself, commenting on the actions in kind of a satirical fashion? Okay. I find Jacques an interesting figure in many ways. Right. The cousins, of course, Celia and Rosalind, pardon me, my bad. Celia and Rosalind, who are like sisters, maybe even closer than sisters. How close are they? Again, the gender bending thing. There's a theory that maybe Celia, in the role of Aliena, falls in love with Ganymede. So it gets interesting. This is one of the plays, of course, that features the forest. You have, of course, a question about reason and fantasy. As I mentioned earlier, Joseph Campbell, the author of A Hero with a Thousand Faces, as well as many other important works, talked about the forest as a place where the imagination is in charge. Fantasy, the irrational. You're in a different world where the rules of before no longer apply. So how does that work in this play? Because the quote-unquote real world, the civilized world, the world of the court, doesn't look so great, right? The elder duke is usurped by the younger duke. That happens in the court. That happens in the civilized world. The younger brother is mistreated by the older brother. Again, that happens in the civilized world. So there's a lot of conflict that initiates in that civilized world. So what does it say as we look? Because most of the play takes part in the forest, right? Where all things become possible. It's something to think about as well if you're addressing those questions for the paper, but just to think about also. Okay? Now, unlike novels, those of you who've had my classes before, for instance, may remember my admonition to stay away from movie versions of novels, at least in terms of a substitute for actually reading the novel, because the movie versions are often quite different. But plays were meant to be performed, right? And so I have a slightly more sanguine approach to watching movies of plays. Now, again, it's not quite as good as seeing the play on the stage, but we don't have that anywhere right now. Last summer, as a matter of fact, my wife and I saw As You Like It at the Old Globe in the open air theater. his name I'm forgetting. It was kind of interesting because the first night we saw it, it started raining. Yeah, it rained on the performers, and at first they very gallantly just kept on going, but eventually, I mean, it just started pouring rain. So they stopped the production, gave us rain checks, and we came back another night and watched the full production of As You Like It without the rain. There are film versions of As You Like It. The one with directed by Kenneth Branagh. He does not appear in his own play, his own production, I should say. That was done around 2006, 2007. It is mentioned in the bibliography for As You Like It. There are not a lot of productions of As You Like It. But one thing I will say is that the movie is relatively short. I believe it's less than 2 hours. So Shakespeare plays are generally 3 hours on the stage if you do all the play, if you do the whole thing, right? So that basically means they cut. And that's real common. Even nowadays on the stage, modern times, they cut because most contemporary audiences don't want to be out there for 3.5 to 4 hours for a play. That's just not the way we do things anymore, right? We're in a hurry all the time. So even modern productions of plays will sometimes cut. I once saw a production of Henry IV Parts 1, 2, and Henry V all crammed together in one play, right, which involved a significant amount of editing. My point being that the movie is not a substitute for reading the play still, okay? But I really think it's a nice idea to see the movie, or a movie production. The Kenneth Branagh one is the most recent one, but there are older versions as well. I don't know how easy they would be to find. I did not have a hard problem at all finding As You Like It for the 2006, 2007, whatever year that was, version. Okay. By the way, the reason I saw those Henry plays was John Goodman was playing Falstaff. Very fun. And we are going to be reading Henry IV Part 1 later on this semester. That's about all I had. Oh, one last thing. Robin Hood. We may do a Robin Hood question in the next discussion thread next week. I'm kind of fascinated by the allusion to Robin Hood because, of course, Robin Hood is the outlaw, right? And that places the Duke, who's the rightful king, in the position of outlaw when he is living in the forest. So it's interesting. I think it's actually kind of very rich, especially if you understand the Robin Hood tales and their importance. But, I think most people today kind of get the idea of Robin Hood anyway. Rob from the rich, steal, give to the poor, that kind of thing. He looks as good as Errol Flynn, clearly, right? But there's that idea of the pastoral life, right? The life away from the city is somehow pure, more moral, it's more right, more just, more true. Those kind of ideas. Whereas a city, whether it's King John or the usurping Duke Ferdinand, in both cases, right, they're corrupt, they're wrong. Actually, King John's a usurper too, of a sort. His brother, Richard the Lionheart, is the good king, but he's away on the crusade, right, trying to free the Holy Lands. Oh well, what's a king to do? All right, I hope you have enjoyed this video. I'll see you probably next week again.